All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Here were your practice problems. We have f of x plus g of x, and so those are my two functions here. So this is 3x to the 1/2 plus negative 5x to the 1/2. Now, don't let the fact that these are x to the 1/2 change anything here, right? They have the same variable and the same exponent, which means we are simply going to combine like terms, and f of x plus g of x is negative 2x to the 1/2 power. F of x minus g of x just means that we're going to take 3x to the 1/2 minus negative 5x to the 1/2. Therefore, we're adding that, right? So that's going to be 8x to the 1/2. For the multiplication, we've got two different functions here. So this is 7x times x to the 1/6. Now, I remember, of course, that when I multiply variables, I add exponents. So this is x to the 1 plus 1/6. So I'm going to end up with 7x to the 7/6. And we've also got f of x divided by g of x. So instead of adding these together, I'm going to subtract them, and I'm going to end up with 7x to the 5/6. And that's everything we've got for the little practice there. So if you've got questions, make sure that you address them. Otherwise, let's go ahead and move on to the next set of questions. And here we have what's called the composition of functions. So we're going to do example without context here. And I have two functions. I have f of x being 4x minus 1, and I have g of x being 5x minus 2. And I want you to notice what it's asking me for. This is asking me for f of g of x, right? Notice that the input for f is the output for g of x. In other words, I need to take the g of x function and use it as the input for the f function. So let's take a look at what that really means here, okay? So I'm going to take my functions here, f of g of x, and I'm going to take what I know is g of x, and I'm going to replace it as the input for f of x. In other words, I'm going to find f of 5x minus 2. Notice that I just took the g of x function and I put it into the input spot. So now when I go to the f function, I'm going to replace x with 5x minus 2. Again, the g of x is the input for the f of x. So instead of putting x in here, I'm going to replace it with 5x minus 2. And then I need to simplify this. Well, this is being taken to the negative 1 power, which I know means to flip it. So the final simplified version of this equation is 4 divided by 5x minus 2. Let's look at the next example. This one is asking for g of f of x. Again, notice here, the input for g is the output for f. The f of x is in the input spot for the g function, which means I'm going to take the g function and I'm going to input 4x to the negative 1 power. So instead of 5x minus 2, I'm going to have 5 times 4x to the negative 1 power minus 2. And so my simplified answer for g of f of x is going to be 20x to the negative 1 minus 2. I'm taking the input for g as the output for f. So I'm just taking the whole f function and I'm plugging it in for g. Let's look at two more examples. Here we have f of x, which means I'm going to take the f function and I'm going to plug it into itself, right? 4x to the negative 1, this is f to the f of 4x to the negative 1, which means I'm going to take this function and instead of x, I'm going to replace it with 4x to the negative 1. So 4, and then this right here is going to be 4x to the negative 1 to the negative 1 power. Again, notice, all I did was I replaced the x with f of x. And now I have to simplify. Well, I know that this negative 1 is going to be going to both of these powers. So this is 4 times 1/4, right, because that gets flipped. And then this is negative 1 times negative 1, positive 1, so it's x over 1. And 4 times 1/4 cancels out. So my final answer here is just simply x. So f of x is just plain x. Again, I took the input of f and I plugged it into f. I plugged it into itself. Okay? I'm going to do the same thing with g. This is g of x, which means I'm going to take the function g and I'm going to plug it into itself. So 5, but instead of x, I'm writing 5x minus 2 minus 2. Notice that I'm just replacing the x with 5x minus 2. And then I simplify it using the rules that I've already established many other times. And I get 25x minus 12. So g of x equals 25x minus 12. All right, so there's some last problems there for you to go check out on your own. Go do those, and then we will see you in the last video.